Good evening, everyone. Good evening, good evening, good evening. It is, what is it? 4:58, so we're gonna wait a couple more minutes while more people file in. Glad to see everyone. And thank you all for joining us. See Dr. Dan.
Jerome Lewis is here.
Oh,
Listen,
favorite
I'm
doctor.
listening. Gene,
Yes, sir.
thank you so much for talking to my class. My students write journals and comment on classes, and they were totally inspired by your talk, every single one of them. And so I'm so appreciative of how you really turned them on about working for nonprofits and the challenge and everything else you're doing.
I appreciate that. I'm thankful, Dr. Lewis, and anytime, anytime.
And I'm still looking to build a partnership with you and the Urban League. So
I think we just had a meeting about that, and I think we need to have a meeting probably within the next 2 weeks. How
yeah,
about I reach out to you?
let's schedule that.
I will. I most certainly will. I would take care of that tomorrow. I'm putting that in my to-do list.
Yeah, give me some dates and we'll do that.
Awesome. Will do. Will do. I see who else we got. Dr. Dan, how are you, sir?
I am well, thank you.
Fantastic, fantastic. Good to see you as always. Aaron Bass, nice to see you. James DeShane, always good to see you, sir. A lot of great people filing in. We're going to give a couple more minutes. Evelyn Brady. Hey, Natalie, thank you for joining us. I know it was last minute. Jamie, Chris, Brendan. We have a lot of great people joining us. Thank you all so much. So we're going to start. We're going to give people 3 more minutes to jump in, then we'll get everything going. So get your water. You can have a quick minute to run to the bathroom or whatever you got to do. And we'll get started shortly.
Are you making a call?
I'm gonna do a Zoom work for a while.
I can walk the top on the phone, right? I got a Southwest chicken bowl instead of having, trying to call me.
Good evening for those who have made their way in. We're going to give it another minute or two for everyone to file in, and then we'll get everything, get the show started. I know everyone has things they need to do and things they got to do, so I don't think today's meeting will be too long.
Eugene, are we expecting Representative Chalker tonight?
Tonight, he will not be in this meeting, actually. He will not be able to make it tonight. This is something I'm going to let the group know as well. So today, we're going to touch on a couple things. We're going to touch on his draft for this upcoming session of the former HB 129, which was the referendum bill. And we're going to touch on a couple things from our previous meetings, but I don't see today as being that long of a meeting because of the fact that many of the recommendations won't, it's Representative Chakotay's bill, so I don't want to make any changes or make anything definite on something when he's not here. So we're going to just take recommendations, we'll give it back to him, and then we'll do the final presentation, which we were kind of supposed to do today. We'll have more of the feedback from the group and be able to provide that final presentation probably at our next meeting. Sorry for that long answer, but just want to make sure everyone's on the same page. All right. Let me see. Okay, well, it is 5:04, so we can get the ball rolling. I want to thank you all so much for being here. We are the Funding and Governance Working Group. Today is November 19th. Time is flying, and we're going to get right to it. So as we always say, with our welcomes, please make sure you mute yourself when you're not speaking. Also, the chat function to ask questions, you can use that down at the right. Please note this meeting is being recorded, may be posted for the public, which you can see with the top left hand. And working group members, please type in your name in the chat so that we know you're present, so we don't have to do the round.
It looks like maybe Eugene is frozen. Or maybe I'm frozen.
It's me. I think it was me.
Okay.
I thought he was just being cordial and letting people type their names in.
He's a cordial guy, but I'm not sure if it's that cordial.
He'll come back soon. Let's see.
Otherwise, you're in charge, Haley.
Meeting canceled. Just kidding.
Is that like the college rule?
I think Tika could take it over. You have that throne chair you use all the time, so I think
My wicker chair.
Maybe his connection was.
He dropped all the way off, so I'm assuming he's going out. He knows it. He's going out and coming back in.
Yeah. So we'll just wait a second.
In the meantime, I'll take this opportunity to welcome Kevin Carson, Superintendent in Sussex Tech School District, is joining us this evening.
Yes, thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome.
Hey, Kevin.
Oh, he made it back.
Eugene, nobody talked about you while you were gone.
Sure. All I know is my service just went out completely, and this is the second time it's happened today.
Oh,
I think I'm going to move. If it happens again, I'm going to move to another space. But oh my goodness, I feel like I'm talking. The next thing you know, whole screen goes blank. So, all right,
Yep.
Where were we? So I apologize for that, everyone. So again, Representative Chakotay is unable to make it today, but we're going to still press forward. One of the things that we're going to do is discuss the referendum reform legislation. Mainly, I want to get your feedback and any questions that you have. We'll be taking this information and we'll make sure Representative Chakotay has it so that he can finalize this draft, this piece of legislation for upcoming session in January. He'll present it to the group and we can, get the ball we can get the ball rolling. Also, we have the amazing, is the amazing Natalie here? Natalie is here. Natalie Woloshin. She is an incredible house attorney that is taking the time to be here and join us to maybe answer any questions that she may be able to answer. Hey, there she is. Hey, how you doing today, Natalie? And thank you for doing this at kind of a last minute late notice. So we really appreciate that. And so she may be able to help us with any questions that we have. I know one question was already emailed to me, and I'll present that when we talk about the bill as well. And then lastly, we'll go over the engagement strategy, framework, and next steps. So without further ado, go to the next slide. So if you, I don't know if you've all gone through your previous email that actually had the full draft of the bill. Oh, see, Dr. Shelton always doing the homework. Appreciate it. Dr. Shelton certainly did his homework, but we sent out a draft of the bill for you all to take a look at and to get your feedback. We pulled out a couple things from the legislation so that you all can have here, and we can take a look at. I'm going to give everyone just a couple seconds to just read through, and then there's one more slide that contains more information of the new draft of the old HB 129. And then we can maybe ask Natalie if anyone has any questions, and if you care to have any specific thoughts of things that you believe should be changed, or specific recommendations, we'll take those down as well, and we will pass them over to Representative Chicocha. I am not be messing with his bill, so I'll just give him all the recommendations, and then I'll let him go from there. Never mess with a legislator and their legislation, right? So I'll give a couple seconds to review, and then we'll go from there.
I see Chuck Longfellow raised his hand.
Yes,
Yeah.
go ahead,
Looking at
Chuck, the
this-
floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Looking at this, I'm not sure what the third part C is supposed to be doing. It almost seems like it might be left over from something else, or maybe there's a word not quite right on that. I think that A and B kind of does the job. I don't,
Okay.
maybe somebody can explain what C is.
Chuck, they're going to think we're in cahoots. I just put that in the chat.
We are in cahoots.
There we go. Natalie, any particular thought that you may have?
So I was involved with this. This was Representative Jake's bill from last year or 2 years ago.
Yep.
And I remember that there was some discussion that they wanted to have an either or. It was either going to be no higher than this or no lower than this. And I don't remember, and I could probably go back and do a deep dive into my emails, but I remember that there was a discussion that they wanted an alternative to the higher, that it could not be any lower than a certain amount as well.
Got it. And also,
so if that were the case, I apologize, Eugene.
no, go ahead.
So if that were the case, if CPI happens to be 1% in a given year, the school board would then be forced to raise it that 1%, but could go as high as 2%.
Correct.
Yeah. Yep.
I just want to make sure I understood. Thank you.
Yes.
And I just received a note. CPI stands for Consumer Price Index. I just received a personalized note for that.
And there's a couple different ways you can calculate that, which is why the -W is there.
Yes, absolutely. And that the -W stands for, is it like urban, or I believe it's like
Wage workers or something
Yeah.
like that.
yeah, wage workers. So something else that said something.
Emily taught me, she's on the call. I can't remember, but Emily's the one who taught it to me.
It's a consumer price index for urban wage earners and clerical workers.
Yes, urban wage. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Are there any other questions or recommendations based upon what it is that you all see right here in front of you now?
Does, sorry.
Hi, this is Rick Geisenberger.
How
Just,
are you?
I don't know if you can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Secretary.
Okay.
How are you?
Good. So this is just a comment that I think probably all of you or many of you have probably thought about already. But there's a lot of misinformation out there. You know, there've been a lot of news journal articles recently about reassessment and the status of the reassessment case in the Court of Chancery and discussion with the counties. You know, I'll share with the group that over the last couple of weeks, you know, more and more people have become familiarized themselves with how this actually works. And particularly if I'm correct, the 15% increase that counties theoretically can derive, and I believe 10% for school districts. And I've received a number of emails, quote unquote, about the hidden tax, that's a hidden tax increase. I've tried to make the point that it's not hidden because it's in state law that it's allowable. And presumably the taxing authorities, the counties and the school districts themselves in open public meeting would have to vote on them because they'll have to reset their tax rates as a result of a reassessment. But I think my observation is it's going to be hard to, given that dynamic, it's probably going to be hard to divorce this issue from that issue that's out there. And, you know, I'm just wondering whether, if you're going to do something like this, obviously I'm not speaking for the governor's office here because I haven't talked about this with the governor, but it seems to me that you might need to somehow tie those things together. Maybe give people comfort that they're not going to see, you know, that if they do this, 10% will be capped at something less.
Yeah.
And the 15% will be capped at something less, because I think if people see this and think that they're going to be looking at a 10% increase in 2024, you know, keeping in mind, of course, as we all know, that you could have some people that see way more than 10% or 15%, because it could be that their property has appreciated 2 or 3 times faster than the average of the rest of the county. And you're going to have some people who have appreciated it lower than the average for the county, who should in theory see a tax cut. But you've also got that 10% that even if you were exactly at the county average, people think there's going to be this automatic 10 or 15. Yeah. So if they also see this, I just think you've got to recognize that that's out there and it's something to think about.
No, that's a really good point, Secretary. So one of the things that we're actually going to discuss a little later on in our presentation today is the need for proper education and messaging around this legislation and anything, not just this, but anything that we're doing is in particular in these times where people are already in a lot of cases already hurting financially, and educating people to know what the difference is, and making sure that there's proper messaging around this referendum reform bill. So I agree with you, and that's actually one of the things that we'll be addressing a little later as well. Thank you. Is there, Tika, you had something?
Kind of piggybacking off of that, I was wondering, I thought the original version that Representative Jakes put out mentioned, excuse me, how often school boards were allowed to do this. I thought it was only like they were allowed to do it one time without going to a vote. Do you know if that is going to also still be the case?
Let me check.
I might be able to help with that, Eugene.
Go
Two
ahead.
different things. The next thing, which I'm guessing is the next slide because it's next in the bill, was a one time that was a fix. So without going into all the details, right? The referendum cycle requires there to be you sort of overtax for a period of time and undertax for a period of time in order to get through your referendum cycle. So that the ones that are potentially on the bottom of that curve, right about ready to go to referendum, thank you, perfect, would never pass a referendum again, and therefore would now be deficit forever and never be able to fix it. So there was a one-time provision in Jake's bill, which is C in the, there it is. That's different than what we've looked at up till now. That would be done yearly.
Sorry for not putting that slide up earlier, Tika. I'm sorry.
No worries. Thank you.
So this is Emily. Just to clarify, I believe the intent is that that section, that one-time section, would allow for a rate increase higher than 2% if that was necessary to get them to the point, to whatever district, to the point where they had that 3 months projected local salary.
Yes, correct.
But that would, again, only be a one-time thing. And then I think the original bill does allow for annual increases.
And so one of the things that we also wanted to bring up along with this, where we have, can we go to the next, I believe it's the next one, a couple of things that, was it the referendum reform, next one? Yeah, so along with what you just saw, here's some other things that we wanted to bring up and make sure.
Eugene?
Yes.
Sorry for interrupting. Do you think, did other people, I just wanted to know if other people had, thoughts, because we sort of had a robust conversation about this one, and then we kind of started talking about this one, but I didn't know if people had more questions about that one-time catch-up provision. If not, we can move on, but I just wanted to make sure people had time for questions or thoughts.
I'm sorry for trying to run this through. Sorry. Any questions?
Also, I see in the chat, Chuck thinks,
Drop part C.
Thinks we should drop part C from this one, the lower limit. And looks
Mr.
like Aaron
Bass agrees as well. So that's a note that we'll certainly take. Okay.
There was a discussion, I think, if I remember in the drafting of this, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, there was a discussion at one point where the board would have, it wouldn't, I'm trying to describe, that if they did not elect to take the increase, they would have the ability to take it in the future. That was dropped when they added this section. So potentially, if we were going to drop C, which is the bottom end that you have to take something, we may want to then add back the provision that if I don't take it this year, I don't lose it forever. Because it could be based on whatever else is going on in the community. I don't want to take it this year, but next year that would mean I could take 4% or CPI over the course of 2 years. Just something to consider. If we drop it, I don't disagree that I think it's a bad look that we have to take a minimum, but we also don't want to put a district in a position where if the board chose for whatever reason not to take it, they then put themselves in that deficit forever.
Yeah. Okay. I would certainly add that to our notes as well from Representative Chakotay. Really good point. Thank you for that. Any other remaining thoughts out there? Questions? All right, I'll make sure that is added. Thank you so much. And here's more additional information for you all. Title does not apply for raising capital. Okay, so any questions? Just want to make sure I'm not breaking up on you all. Okay, all right. I'm a little concerned about that. Okay, so as you can see with section 2B of this section does not apply to tax levies for major capital improvements. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Any specific thoughts, questions, issues, concerns with that? All right. So we will move along. So now, two things that we believe that there should be some discussion about. We go to the first slide, please. These are a couple of things that were brought up. Should the bill have? Yes.
You took all the pieces of the first page of the bill, but there's some stuff on the second page of the bill that's not addressed. Are we going to address that later? I just don't want to leave the bill discussion without addressing them if we can.
They're not parts of the slide, but I could share my screen with the bill and we can talk through them if that would be, if Eugene's okay with that.
Sure, that's perfectly fine.
Okay. 1 second.
Because quite frankly, I was hoping that Natalie was going to help explain D. It was a little confusing to me what the purpose of it was. So I was waiting to get there so Natalie could try to explain it to me.
That was a test, wasn't it, Dan? I've passed school already.
I know we tried to, I know the team tried to pick out spots that we initially thought more conversation would want to be in dialogue would want to happen around, but I'm glad you picked this out from the draft that we sent over. So
can everyone see that okay?
Yep, I can. And can everyone see? Good to go.
It looks good, Haley.
Okay, thank you.
In all honesty, I cannot explain it to you. I don't know why this was, because I don't remember if this was in the original draft or it was added later. Because I remember that I think it was D and E that Representative Jakes asked me to add after he met with whoever, and he asked me to add D and E. And I don't remember what, and this was specific language that he gave me. So I don't know what his reasoning was for that.
And this is Chuck. It looks to me like it's to protect the taxpayers from a district going on a spending spree in order to spend down their money so that they can get more tax or something. That's what that looks like.
That's exactly what it was. I worked on this with Merv at the time and Representative Jakes, and that's exactly what it was, because there were some legislators who were concerned that this would just be runaway budget growth. And so it was more of a safety and a caution to say exactly what Chuck said, that there won't be runaway budget growth. But there are districts that have growth because they have more students each year. And so it was the balance between its growth beyond what your number of students growing is. So it's not just a spending spree in order to raise your taxes. So it's a precaution more than anything else.
Would you bring
Thank
up
you,
the
Joe.
would you
Thank
bring
you.
up the section that talks about the capital and the tuition part? Okay. Okay, because
Does
I
that work?
noticed, yes, I noticed that match was missing from that. I'm not sure if it should be in there or not. I haven't stared at it enough to know. I know that the intent of this is for the operating section of the tax rate. And so this is saying that you don't consider the major cap rate, the debt service rate that is, and the tuition program, but match is missing. So, if this were to go through, I wouldn't want somebody then, to say, hey, I'm a watchdog and I noticed you've raised your taxes this amount and it's because of match. And I don't know that the intent of this is to say, oh, well, if you do match, you can't do the operating CPI or 2%. So I don't know whether match needs to be added to this or not, but it's something that should be looked at.
I think the question, Chuck, is whether or not tuition needs to be in there, because I think from what I recall from the intent is that the entire intent was you will still have referenda for major cap. So the tuition tax, the match tax, those are separate, but I think that the message and what they were trying to make clear was that you will still have referenda for major cap. And so, and that, this bill doesn't change that in any way, shape, or form. And so voters will still vote on that. I don't know why tuition got thrown in there, but I would suggest that rather than throw match in there too, it's really just, or at least from what I recall, was about the public process for a referenda being about specific to major cap, and it didn't change that.
Well, yeah. So maybe another way of looking at this is for 2 to read something like the subsection B of this section shall only apply. And I know that the lawyers know the difference between shall, must, and all that. They can pick the right word, but shall or whatever only apply to the current expense rate. That way it's very clear that that B is only restricting the current expense increase without a referendum to 2% or CPIW, whichever is greater. Because when you throw the major cap and tuition in there, then people might make assumptions that don't hold with this. I think the intent is only the operating or current expense portion.
Thank you for that.
I do think though there might be a case for separating out, because adding tuition and match are already, we can already raise those with board approval, so there's no public involvement. This would highlight the fact that major cap is the only area that does not require a public vote, or does require, I'm sorry, still requires a public vote. And that might be a little less confusing when you're looking at it from the wholesale in the future.
Hey, Chuck here again. But if we want to really break it down and get technical, the referendum doesn't set the rate of debt service. The referendum allows us to take on debt that that the board sets a rate on for debt service. So really, even in that, even though we disclose our best guess on what the effects will be on our tax rate, the voters aren't voting on a tax rate. They're not voting on a tax levy. The board sets the amount of tax necessary to service the debt that the voters approved in the major capital referendum. So, when you really get technical on this whole thing breaks down in section 2. That's why I'll keep going back to maybe we need to be explicit that it only applies to current expense.
I think that's a good question for the representative, because it was more, again, from my memory, it was more of a clear statement to the public. Now, again, the public doesn't necessarily read bills line by line, but then again, they do. But it was more their attempt to say there will still be and I realize this doesn't say that. So I guess if that was the intent, now this is a new legislature, so perhaps, the feelings are different. So I think that's a good question to ask Nnamdi.
Okay. So
we're actually an area where getting some public input in terms of what would be more palatable from a public perception standpoint, that might be a good thing to bring them in, more public view as well.
Absolutely. we're actually going to take this, not both, a lot of the points that were given today. We'll take them and we'll actually have a conversation with our team and Representative Chakotcha when he gets back. And we'll probably reach out to many of the individuals who've had these specific points, the different points, to also provide follow-up as we start nailing it down, and then we can present what the final version looks like at a later date. But these points are very important, so thank you so much for them. Any other specific points that anyone cares to bring up?
Eugene, I know Tika put in the chat a comment, so I don't know if she wanted to speak upon that more.
Sure. Like basically, it was a little while ago, but it was piggybacking on Dr. Shelton's comment about allowing there to be extensions for school boards to use it beyond the year. So I was just commenting that we may want to put parameters around that, so it's not, you know, indefinitely or anything like that.
Thank you for that point, Tika.
I guess I'm still curious about Secretary Geisenberger's point on how this plays into the reassessment project and keeping an eye on what's the total impact on various communities. We set percentages in here, and the other piece comes in. How do we ensure that it's not out of control for one of the communities?
True. That is something that we are certainly going to take into consideration with Representative Chakotcha, and also we will reach back out just to even get more of your feedback once we have that, you know, that team meeting with Representative Chakotcha as well. But that's a really good point. It's a very good point. Any other thoughts or questions that you care for us to make sure we get down? Okay, all right. Thanks again for that link. We'll head back to the slides. Thank you so much, Haley. And so these are just questions that have been brought up internally that we wanted to present to the committee. One is, should the provision to allow General Assembly to increase the rate cap for a single year if there are extraordinary circumstances? And as you can see, an example could be skyrocketing costs relating to utilities or employee benefits. So that is one where we like to get any, you know, outstanding feedback or ideas or thoughts that you may have. This has come up, so we wanted to bring it before you all. And we can actually go to
my comment would be that the General Assembly always has the power to do that. You don't need to put it in legislation.
They have the power to set a local tax rate, Rick, are you sure?
They have the power, if you have a rate cap, to amend the law. I mean, it would require the same vote of the General Assembly. I'm assuming somebody's talked about whether this is a 3/5 vote or a majority vote. Obviously, tax increases of the state require a supermajority. I don't know whether authorizing someone to raise taxes similarly requires a 3/5 vote. But
I originally thought it was
whatever the mechanism is, the General Assembly can always amend the statute either through epilogue language or through a statutory change to say this year we'll change it. Although my suspicion is that adding something like this, I think a lot of people's reaction would be, you know, extraordinary beyond inflation. What, you know, that's going to be the reaction. You know.
Got it.
So I think my instinct is it's going to, you know, if you add something like that, it probably won't help. It won't help the cause.
This was from one of the things that came up. I brought it up. This is one of the things that came up from Chuck's predecessor. When he did some math, when this bill first came out, there was a healthcare spike a few years ago it was a Delaware specific, so it didn't reflect in CPI. And it actually then would have put us behind the 8 ball going forward forever. Sort of, that was the idea, is that if one of these spikes happen, you go behind the 8 ball forever because you can never catch back up to it.
Right. The obvious counter to that is that this gives you an incentive to try to manage your healthcare costs beyond, below inflationary levels, which is what.
But the locals don't get to do that. That's a state function.
I understand. It puts pressure on the state, though, to do that. So, I mean, if you look
specifically at the state, I'm just messing with you, right?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things you may want to look at is whether we're using the right measure of CPI. If you go and look at the budget benchmark that's been created by executive order, we did not use CPI. We used something called the implicit price deflator. And the reason we use the implicit price deflator, which is a measure of the rate of growth in local and state government inflation, was that it looks at a different pool of goods. It looks at the pool of goods that are typically purchased by state governments, which is obviously more weighted toward healthcare than, say, the CPI index, less weighted toward fuel than the typical consumer, different weightings for groceries and things like that, but healthcare. So you may want to think about whether the CPI, of course, is a better measure of, presumably CPIW in particular is probably a better measure of what the taxpayer feels they can afford, because their wages might be more closely tied to CPI. But the mix of what schools are actually spending money on, which is much more weighted toward wages and healthcare, I don't know, maybe food, transportation for sure, might be better captured in what's called the implicit price deflator. So that's something to think about.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that. Thank you much. Any other thoughts?
But I would add, if there's some special measure of inflation that looks at the basket of goods purchased by schools, that would be the ideal, but I don't know if such a thing is gathered by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The implicit price deflator looks at all state and local governments, but obviously education is only about, it's probably only about 40% of that number. The other 60% is goods and services purchased for non-educational purposes. So.
Hey,
Thank you.
Eugene, this is James. If I have a quick question for you, and I
Go ahead,
apologize. I've missed a couple of meetings, so I want to make sure it hasn't already been discussed, and maybe I've just missed it.
Sure.
So I'm trying to get a sense of matching up the role of not only the full consortium, but the redistricting and funding task force subcommittee for, City of Wilmington, surrounding schools, the reason why this all got started up. And I feel like we've shifted away to tackling referendum reform, which is, quite frankly, a statewide issue. I know Kevin's on here from Sussex Tech, but are we, as a group, just providing feedback to Representative Chicocha? Are we supposed to be endorsing the bill as an end product result of all this? Are we supposed to be lobbying for it, or supporting it when it comes forward? I mean, I think this is, and the only reason I ask is, I think as a functional matter, referendum reform for the state is so much more broad than I feel like the mandate of the consortium has been, right? The mandate really was, how do you tackle City of Wilmington, education, equity, funding, redistricting, and the rest. And I feel like the redistricting piece has been left by the wayside because we just didn't focus. We were going to focus on it and then didn't. And then it was the funding piece, which is now changed in the light of a few other things, but now it's referendum reform. And so, this is probably an offline discussion, but it'll be interesting to see what the role of this group is. Are we all supposed to support it? Because I feel like the people that I represent are not going to support this. And so I don't want to go down this path with the group and then now all of a sudden at the back end have to say, no, sorry guys, I can't support it because of, for me, the clients I have, the industries I represent, this is not sort of where we started from. And so
Sure.
it's a very broad question and maybe not appropriate for this, but I felt like, you know, it needed to be mentioned at some point here, because we're, you know, I don't know if there's anybody on from Kent County. If Kevin's the only person from Sussex County, to put the target on Kevin's back, but, you know, this is way broader. And this bill, you know, Representative Jake's bill, for those of you who weren't, you know, around in the hall, I mean, this bill got introduced and it was like a sack of wet cement on the ground. And so anyway, I'm just trying to get some more information on sort of what our role is and how this has been expanded significantly in scope, in my opinion.
So thank you for that. So I'll say a couple quick things. One is, as you know, we had to change, we had to move the ship a little as COVID-19 earlier in the year, in the spring. It's funny, we internally joke about the fact that we were actually about to have a meeting in April where we really got into many of the details that we were set to initially discuss around redistricting once, and then all of a sudden everyone, you know, schools were closed, things changed. We had a conversation with many of the superintendents and the teams, just saying literally like right that moment in time was not the time to discuss redistrict, something as large as redistricting during that time period. But also in the legislation, which all brings us here today, is this conversation about funding and also the different mechanisms. And we decided as a group to discuss the different mechanisms, whether it was the tax and also referendum form. That's some of the things that we discussed. I believe it was in July, August, that we kind of came to this point. So this is just one aspect. And for the children within the city of Wilmington, I think this has a great deal of impact for the group that we're here to actually discuss. For many of the children within the city, within the Christina, within Red Clay, Brandywine, or any other, I mean, it's so much tied into the lives of the students within our city. So that's why this became top of the pile in a sense. But it does not stop us from continuing to push the ball in redistricting and also some other things. I think one of the things Representative Chicocha and I discussed specifically was the fact that we'll probably touch on that come early in January. We'll get back to that conversation, but we did not want to, we spoke to many of the people here on this Zoom right now about the fact that it wasn't necessarily the time to have those discussions around redistricting in April and May. And we asked many of the individuals here on this Zoom call as to next steps and moving forward. And this is the path that we thought would best provide, be able to impact the students of Wilmington in a positive light. If you, and I'll answer your last point, you're right. And not everyone's going to, I have no expectation. I'm not going to sit here and speak for Representative Chicocha. I have no expectation that everyone on this committee is going to be 100% affirmative on anything that is proposed. I certainly don't have that belief at all. Even if we were to do redistricting, I don't think everyone would have 100, no matter what the plan was, and 100 people could agree, and 100 people wouldn't vote for. That's just the reality of the matter. So, but what I do believe is just making sure that we all represent different groups, different interests, and I think it's important for these different groups of interest voices to be heard. I'm not going to speak for him, but I'm sure Representative Chicocha will take this into consideration for the bill that for this referendum for legislation. And I also, lastly, we can also have conversations offline, online, whatever the case may be in regards to this as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I didn't mean to, throw a log in the path here, but I just wanted to get some clarification. So thank you very much. I appreciate that.
No, not a problem at all. And I just saw Aaron Best. We're not going to decide redistricting. We will, Representative Chakotcha and Senator Lockman will take a bill. Yes, we will discuss. Thank you. Yeah, discuss and decide. Two totally different words, right? But Representative Chakotcha and Senator Lockman, they have to bring a bill to the General Assembly, which will allow us to continue on with the work that we're doing. And so I believe once we're able to do that and then have conversations with many of the key stakeholders, which you all are, we can have maybe that conversation and moving forward and discuss next steps. So James, I appreciate your question. Thank you for giving it. Please, any more questions, we're here for it. I mean, this is what it's about. And lastly I'll say is if you have any thoughts that, are just totally against, whatever the case may be, please, we would love to get your thoughts as to why, and so that we can also see what kind of feedback or what kind of changes, if changes can be made in the legislation. So please do. We would greatly appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, so where are we? So does anyone have any final thoughts, questions, or concerns with this discussion piece here that was brought up? If not, we will go to the next one that was given to us internally as well. And that is, should this bill include a reporting component for school districts that require them to show how they spent the additional funding? So that was brought up as well. I'd just like to get any thoughts, input that you may have on this question.
I can speak to that a little bit.
Sure.
And it's hard for me to say no, because that sounds like we want to hide something. But the idea is that this is really inflation. So it's not, I mean, with a referendum, with a capital referendum, you're looking for a new building, or you're looking for a new HVAC system, something that's very concrete. With this one, it's just continuing to do what you're already doing. So reporting it is really reporting interest, or cost increases. And so there's really not new stuff to report. So it becomes somewhat problematic, because there's not, with a 2% increase, it's really the cost of healthcare. Now, maybe that's what we want to show and see, and we can certainly do that, but we do that as part of the budget presentation.
Sure.
So I can speak to that a little bit, because that was one of the things that I've mentioned based on conversations I've had in the community. But even with my grandmother, who was an educator, and she's no longer with us, but her concern in the latter years of voting for her referendums were that what they said they went to, or what they promised, even in an increase, was not what was happening. And so as I had more conversations with some of the other folks in our church and her friends, they felt that there is not much transparency in where money is being spent or how it's being spent. And so one thing I had mentioned as maybe a possible solution. So I'm the president of Parent Information Center of Delaware. And each year we do an annual highlights of, thank you to our donors. Thank you. This is because of your increased in tax. It could say these 3 schools have new windows and new HVAC, or whatever it is. But the bottom line is that people see you come ask for money, but then they don't feel like they ever see what comes to fruition with it. So then all it is these asks, but they never understand that. So I think to get people more on board, there should be a mechanism where they can understand that better. And the other piece of it is that when people often vote against it, they're not necessarily voting against the particular operational cost. Sometimes it's just their grievance for other things that are going on. So I think that we should review the processes for how people discuss concerns they have, that whether they're a parent or a family in the school community or just a community member, and then the procedures for how that takes place.
This is Rick, and again, I feel like every time I talk, I need to say I'm not endorsing this. I'm not endorsing this bill, but I'm trying to give feedback to the sponsor, who I know is not on the call. But what Tika just said is exactly it. I mean, realistically, you're going to have to be transparent. You're going to have to add all sorts of transparency measures to this. This might be one of them. Maybe something that says you're only going to do it for the next 5 years. You're going to look at then how it actually got used and revisit it again in 5 years. I mean, I think I think it's going to be a very tough uphill climb to get this done. And you're going to need all kinds of things like this added to have any chance of getting it through. You're going to need all kinds of things like this that say there's going to be a high level of transparency, a review period to see whether it worked, how it worked, all kinds of things like that to have any shot. And even then it's going to be tough realistically, which is why I suggested maybe there's a trade-off on the reassessment issue that might, be attractive to some people, right? Because otherwise everyone's expecting a 10% increase anyway or at least some people fear a 10% automatic increase in 2025. So if you lessened that or took it off the table, maybe you could tie the two together. I don't know, but.
Thank you for that, Secretary.
Yeah.
Any other questions, thoughts? Okay. All right. And so now we will.
We got one in the chat.
Yeah, you have one in the chat, Eugene.
What happens for districts whose school boards decline to vote for this additional tax increase per school board's presentation? Yeah.
I think that was the reason they added that number C, correct?
I believe so, but I'm going to ask, is Natalie on? I believe that is why we do have C, but I would kind of lean on Natalie to let me know if I am correct or not.
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. It's in the chat. What happens for districts whose school boards decline to vote for additional tax increases per the school board's presentation? Does that create a new generation of have and have not districts? That's a good question. Thank you, James. So I was thinking, I thought it was, that may have been addressed in C, but what I will still do is take this question. This is something that we'll also run through in our internal meeting as well. But I appreciate that question. That's something that we have to be very mindful of. Jill, I see Jill just jumped.
I was just going to say the discussion was, with the school boards, the discussion was that it would overly politicize the school board elections. The con was that it would actually make people more interested in the school board elections if their school board wasn't approving such taxes or wasn't, engaging. So I think you have two schools of thought on what that would do for school board elections. But it really focused the kind of voters' attention on school board elections, which you may or may not know may get, an unbelievably low turnout or percentage of people in the district voting for the school board members.
Thank you, Jill. Any additional thoughts? Thank you for that question, James. That's something that we will be going over as well. I also want to make sure that there are not any additional thoughts. Just scrolling through, make sure no one has any thumbs up or questions. If you have any additional, please feel free to shoot them into the chat as well. So we'll go to our next slide, please. engagement strategy. And one of the things that we would need around this is, as we discuss, a coordinated effort around just engagement, getting feedback, thoughts, ideas from community members once we're able to kind of lock this down as to what this is going to look like with Representative Chukwucha. Also just consistent messaging going through some of the conversations that we've had earlier, and also buy-in and participation. And we'll also be partnering with, as we come with something that we can all consensus around what the legislation will be, partnering with other Reading Consortium members and community groups. So we want to make sure that this is not something that's people in the community feel like has been done in a vacuum. We've thought about having town halls up and down the state, and other areas and ways of engaging community members about this process, just to get some buy-in and that needed participation. I know the Delaware team has some things that they want to kind of discuss as well, of ways to get engagement out. And so I will pass the mic over to them for the next slide. I believe that is. There we go. I believe this is going to be Chris and Haley.
I was still muted, sorry.
Oh.
But yeah, so to help with our engagement strategy, we put together this framework. So we know that the last time that Representative Jakes tried to get House Bill 129 passed, the main criticism was that legislators and community members were not engaged. And like we were talking about earlier, there is issues of transparency probably already. So we want to sort of proactively fix that, or at least work to. So I'll review this framework and define some of these terms so we're all talking about the same thing. The first column in this document is community group / target audience, which is the broad group that we'd like to reach. The second column is the specific person or group. So that means the actual organization or person we want to contact. The third column is messaging, which relates to what information we think would resonate with the target audience. So for example, we know, referendum reform will be will be different for the business community than it is like for parents. Materials needed or delivery method relates to how we share our information. It could be a one-pager or a Facebook post, or presenting maybe about referendum reform at a community group meeting. The last column, who reaches out, is asking for a volunteer to be the person that connects with our target audience. And we're envisioning these volunteers can be both on and off the consortium, kind of for reasons that James mentioned earlier. We sort of know that you're here representing a group, so you can't necessarily lobby for the bill in some cases, so we're aware of that. And yeah, that's really that's sort of the terms of the framework. And we do have other community groups, so the ones that you see here are not the only ones. These were just the only ones that fit on the slide. But I'll run through, so you see up here we have an example that we popped in there. So I'll run through that real quick and then we can sort of start filling this out together. So we have superintendents across the state as our target audience. The actual group that we would like to reach out to would be the Delaware Chief School Officers Association and/or DASA. The messaging that we think would resonate with the superintendents would be framed around showing exactly what the bill does for the school district, the mechanics behind it, so rate changes and that one-time catch-up provision that we talked about. The materials we need could be a one-pager of the key points of the legislation, and we could also present at the superintendent's monthly meeting to hear feedback. And we didn't fill out the who reaches out column yet because we thought maybe we could do that together. But So just like how we have this example filled out for the superintendent's column, I thought maybe we could go through this document together and sort of, fill out our ideas. So are there any questions or feedback?
Haley, were you gonna bring up the Google Doc to do that live or just have people chime in?
Let's see. I was going to, I can sort of write in this if I make it not full screen. But I know, Tika, you started filling out the Google Doc, so do you think that would be better? I can share the Google Doc.
If people wanted some more examples, I didn't necessarily fill in all the 2 columns yet, but I did give some more examples. But either if you're able to write on here, that's fine, unless people wanted to see some additional examples. I'm just not sure how you're capturing the information.
Yeah, when it's in like the regular slide format, I can just write, but now that I'm sort of presenting it, I can't like click on the thing. So maybe I will just share the Google Doc. 1 second.
You should be able to type in the Google Doc and us see it live too.
Yep, exactly. All right, let me pull that up real quick. And I guess I can pop the link in the chat for the Google Doc too. I just got like dual screens, so I'm figuring that out. Can everyone see the Google Doc? Okay. So this was sent to everyone ahead of time. And the link sharing might have actually not been working, so I apologize that if you couldn't get to it. But here we have the same thing, except it's just the entire document of other groups that we thought we could reach out to. So here's the one about superintendents that I talked through, and Tika was kind and started to add some ideas. So does anyone want to pick a place to start or have any ideas or react based on what they have seen in any of the columns so far? Okay. Maybe Tika, do you want to speak to any of your additions?
Can you scroll down a little bit maybe?
Yeah, sure.
Or up, I guess. I wanted to see how many I filled in. Okay. Yeah, so I filled in ones for different contact groups that I had that were related to the categories and then added other. I will say when I think about the engagement and the contacts, I'm not necessarily just thinking about in the referendum, but I think part of engagement is the education of community about school funding in general. So I don't know if maybe I'm the only one that's been looking at it like that, and maybe I've looked at it a little different, but I think that's crucial if we're asking them to engage, to make sure they have some of the prior background knowledge to have those thoughtful discussions and add to it, because I think that there's probably different perspectives of people in different avenues that that we hadn't considered.
Sorry, my headphones were like acting up.
So Tika, to that.
I missed the last thing you said.
Yeah, Chris.
Go ahead.
Yeah, to that point, looking at messaging for like the Parent Information Center of Delaware, what do you think would really kind of resonate with that group, or what would they be interested in knowing as far as referendum reform? So what do you think, if before delivery method, what do they need to know to determine whether or not this is something that they would consider supporting?
Right. So I'm gonna put this out there that I filled this in today, and I also just had a death in my family, so I hadn't really prepared for this meeting the way I would have liked to. But what I did do is I went in and I basically put in my networks that I know that I could reach out to, but I didn't fill in those middle columns because I wanted to put more thought into what would be important for them. And so like with Parent Information Center, you know, we work a lot with families that are at risk or students with disabilities. So I would imagine that the messaging would be around that and why, you know, how funding impacts that.
No, that's great. And that's kind of doesn't have to be, you know, refined at this point, but just kind of thinking about the community groups that you work with. And this goes for everyone, you know, what's your gut reaction? Because at the end of the day, that's what's going to kind of, you know, appeal to people. It's not going to be this well articulated statement. It's going to be kind of, what do people need to know at kind of instinctually about these things before they can kind of make a decision? So kind of think of it from that way.
Any thoughts? I believe sometimes when you don't have that many comments, that means it looks good. So I will congratulate you all on doing such an amazing job.
And I think maybe we can send this out again after the meeting and give folks some more time to actually maybe think about it.
Absolutely. And I think once what we can do is we can send this back out so people can digest it and they could add any different, any additional thoughts or questions that they may have upon this. So then when we go, Dr. Shelton said we currently don't have comment or edit access.
Sorry, I thought I changed that today. I'll make sure that's fixed when we send it out.
This will be a fluid conversation. Yeah, so I believe what we'll do is we'll be able to take the information that we have from both the potential legislation, Representative Chicocha, and I believe it will probably be Senator Sturgeon or Senator Lockman, who may be the Senate Prime. But we'll certainly take the information and thoughts that people have around the potential legislation. We'll get that feedback, put it all together in something clear and concise, and then we'll also do the same for this as well. I asked Haley if you could put your email address in the chat as well, just so that people have it if they have any additional questions, thoughts or comments about the engagement strategy as we start trying to get more people involved in getting feedback up and down the state for this. Are there any other, Chris, were you about to say something? I saw you kind of look up. Okay. Are there any other just general questions, questions or thoughts that this committee has about our presentation today as we get ready to kind of move towards public comment? Scroll, make sure. All right. I don't see any. So with that said, I will open the floor up now for any public comment. Does anyone from the general public have any comments that they care to share? We give every individual about 2 or 3 minutes, depending on the line. So I'm just scrolling in. free to raise a hand. Okay. So I have
Hello.
not- Oh,
Hi.
yes.
Hi.
Solomon, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
I am well, thank you. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you for preparing public comments. So thank you so much. And if you're ready, I can give you the floor.
Okay, yes. I feel a little bit more removed from this conversation than others, but what I would say is the most powerful thing that I've seen regarding referendum reform came out of the group of Friends of Christina and Lisa Elder. And she's been working very hard on wanting to end referendums because of how hard it was for them to pass the recent referendum in Christina. And this group of people, and there's a lady called Helga with them, and basically they just can't do it anymore. They can't face having to do that again. And I just think they have really powerful stories and they're very engaged and they meet all the time. And I know Laura Sturgeon and Mike Ramone go into those meetings, and they're kind of a blank slate in that they didn't know anything about education reform or funding reform. And they're kind of maybe wanting to do bigger and better things, but referendum reform is at the top of their list and they're very motivated to stomp it out. And I think it's a powerful story because, you know, they had to work so hard. They had to sacrifice their time and money and family life and mental health to get this passed, just so that their kids would have something that resembled a school. Because if that most recent Christina referendum hadn't passed, it would have been horrible. You know, it wouldn't have looked like what we consider a school to be. They would have had to make so many cuts. So, and I think it might have only passed because of George Floyd. I mean, I don't know without that. It's just an awful situation. So I think really engaging that group and using their story to communicate, not that this is a choice. We really have to get rid of the referendum system because it impacts the kids and the families in such a negative way. And we really just need to cover, you know, inflation in a different way in Delaware. So that's my comment, but thank you.
Right on time as well. Thank you, Ms. Solomon. I really appreciate it. I believe Helga actually gave public comment in our last meeting, if I recall correctly, and we appreciate that. And also, we've had conversations with Senator Sturgeon. I believe she was also the Senate Prime of Representative Jake's original HB 129, and so we're having even having more conversations with her and this group of amazing advocates as well. So absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other public comments?
I can just endorse what Amy said. My name is Mary.
All right, so I will give you give you 2 minutes for your public comment, and love to have you endorse. If that's
I probably don't need a whole 2 minutes, but I'm part of the group that she mentioned that is a subset of the Friends of Christina. So I'm very active in the Friends of Christina, and a lot of our parents came to us after that last referendum and are like, what do we have to do so that we can never do that again? So we have been meeting, and we definitely, actually, we just met on Tuesday and spoke about how we can best support the work of this commission. Mm-hmm. So please count on that group as an ally in referendum reform.
Thank you so much, Ms. Scorsese. Is that how you pronounce your name?
Shorzy.
Scorsese. Thank you so much. Appreciate your public comment.
Okay.
Does anyone else have anything for public comment?
I'd like to just kind of speak to the meeting, if I may.
So if you could just, I can't really hear you. If you could just, I guess, speak closer to your microphone and just state your name, and I'll give you 2 minutes, sir.
So my name is Troy.
Okay.
I used to work for United Way of Delaware, and I was
Oh,
just kind of chiming in on the conversation because I got the email today, and
absolutely.
I'm interested in knowing a little bit more about the referendum, the process. I guess that you guys were speaking to in the meeting tonight, because I was kind of vague when I entered it, but I didn't want to bombard you guys with questions trying to catch up. So I'll probably email Miss Haley
Okay.
after the meeting and try to get some more information so I can read up on a little bit more of the documents that you guys had on display in the slideshow today, and then probably follow up with her if I have any more questions. But I just wanted to say that this is valuable information, and I would love to contribute to however you guys plan on getting the, I guess, message out and trying to get done whatever it is that you guys are trying to get done.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. It's good to see you. It's been a
I know
while,
it's hard
so
to see me. I know. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
it's hard to see you, so I couldn't. Hard to see you, but thank you so much. It's good to see you, and certainly appreciate your public comment. Does anyone else have any final thoughts or comments? I'm just scanning just to make sure. Any other public comment? All right. Sounds good. Well, I would like to thank everyone. Really appreciate you all for being here this evening. We will be in touch. I ask that you please, once again, Haley's information, her email address is inside the chat. Any questions that you have up, there it is on the form. Please feel free to contact Haley with any additional thoughts, questions, or ideas that you may have. And also feel free, you can reach out to us at any time for any thoughts that we're open, certainly open to discussion and moving forward. So the two things are with the potential legislation and also with the engagement piece. Anything you add would be very much appreciated. So thank you so much. And if there's no other questions, we will close our meeting. So I wish you all a wonderful evening.
Good night. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks.
Good
Good
night,
night.
guys.
Good night. Good night, everyone. Thank you so much.